It's been a long time. How many years do you think?
I hate to count.
Yeah.
But good to see you.
Good to see you too.
We should do a film.
You know, I think, it'd be interesting for people to hear about how the film was prepped, because we had done Outsiders and we went right into Rumblefish.
We had like 2 weeks, right, between the two films?
When did you find out that we were going to do Rumblefish?
I kind of found out when I was packing to get out of Tulsa and go back to LA. I was ready to go back to California. And then we got the news, we're going to do another film, same group, we're just going to stay on for a few more months and do another film. Francis usually kind of confides in me about the plans down the pike, and I was very surprised about this. Apparently he was writing the script on Sundays. There was no script floating around while we were shooting The Outsiders. Did you get a script?
You know, as I remember it, Francis called me in, he told me about the movie. He said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "You know, Francis, I'd like to do a picture in black and white, because probably during the rest of my career, I'll never get to do a black and white picture, because black and white was dying out." And he goes, "Me too." And I was like shocked. And I had shot a lot of black and white when I was in school. So that's why I was keen on doing it, because I was so frustrated shooting color movies, because you would get a wonderful work print and you get a wonderful kind of final print, and then they would do the release and they would just run it through the bath really fast and everything was destroyed. It just drive me nuts. And I really enjoyed doing it. It was the only black and white picture
Well, yeah, me too.
got to do. The Outsiders was supposed to be Gone with the Wind. It was very warm and very romantic.
Big screen.
And, big frame, beautiful kind of...
Big music.
Classic kind of compositions. And Rumblefish was just the complete opposite of that. And, so there was that contrast going.
Thinking about black and white, all the films that were made in black and white, I always wondered how they knew exactly what they were going to get on the screen, because they didn't work in black and white. They worked in color. So they put yellow here or blue there. What did these colors look like on black and white stock? I had boards made with basic a palette of colors, a spectrum of colors.
Filter tests. I shot filter tests too.
Yeah. And to see what red looked like in black and white, different shades of gray. Well, I assume that grays would come out grays, but how colors looked when transformed into black and white. That was one of the things I got involved with.
Yeah, I always thought the big deal with black and white was that it's always the separation. Because if you use a pastel blue and a pastel green, black and white, they're going to look the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to grade them. And when I was going to school, they would take us over to Fox, and they used to have these great big books that had paint samples in them. And the art department had figured out how all those colors reproduced on black and white film. And so they had a real
They had it down because that was their daily menu, black and white. Yeah, for us it was a new world.
Francis had like an elementary school that had been all abandoned, and the Tulsa people let us use it.
The school was a great layout for a movie company.
I thought it was really wonderful that we all got together and we did the electronic blackboard situation. Your brother Alex would draw on the blackboard what we were talking about, and we talked the whole picture through. you know, with such short prep, it was good that we all kind of said what we thought, you know, it should be. You know, Francis had that system where he would do a reading that would be like a radio program to listen to the dialogue.
Biff is looking for you, Rusty James.
I ain't hiding.
He says he's gonna kill you.
Saying ain't doing.
Biff's a mean cat, Rusty James.
And then Alex drew a picture of Benny's pool hall, because we didn't have the sets. The actors would do the scene in front of green screen, and then they'd be matted together. It was this ultra mat, it was called. And so you could see how the scene played.
Francis would do these extensive rehearsals and really hone everything down. And I think that's the reason for the electronic cinema, was to try and get it honed down and fine-tuned before he shot it, you know, so you didn't have to go back and reshoot it or change the scene.
Well, it's a very valid way to do it.
That gang shit was out of style when you was 10 years old.
Oh, shit, man. I was fucking 11. I can remember.
Francis wanted the kids to look at Last Laugh, I think, because of body language, because Emil Jennings starts out, he's very proud and he's very erect and everything else. And when he loses his job, he starts to hunch over, and he wanted the actors to understand how to use body language as part of their character. And one of the films that we also saw was a picture called Decision Before Dawn.
Yeah, I don't get that. Why?
Because that was the wasteland. That was shot in Germany after the Second World War. And
So this kind of
yeah,
devastation.
and so that was the wasteland reference.
Tulsa really yielded a great mother lode of locations. Apparently there was some terrible race riot there.
Oh yeah,
Half the city was destroyed. Where we had the big party at night, those were all totally abandoned buildings. We put glass in the windows just to get reflection so they didn't look like holes. And of course all the neon and lights. But those empty streets, that's all that was left of that part of the town.
that was the black section of town, and it had all been burned out.
Yep.
I want to talk about the strip a little bit, because there's another thing you did that was really good, was that you had the street that was like this, and you had the freeway at one end and nothing at the other end. And the freeway was supposed to look like the continuation of the bridge that was going across the river. So you put a carnival underneath that filled in when you shoot down the street that way, and then on the other end you put all those carnival lights. So there was a background on every direction. The carnival lights were very clever because it didn't cost a lot of money to do, and we were under terrific pressure to do it as inexpensively as possible. I thought that was really great too. I was amazed when you did that. I went, boy, this is really good.
But I loved those streets that went nowhere, where the bus dropped off the kids and stuff. And all you had was the street, the sidewalk, and the curb with all this grass growing up between the cracks in the road. It was very provocative. It was kind of a post-apocalypse look with the smoke, and like something terrible had happened or it was going to happen.
You had the fire department burning the grass off so it wouldn't be dangerous. So you'd have all these big billows of smoke.
Look, just go fuck yourself, all right? You are an asshole.
It gave a kind of an apprehension to the film, as well as the shadows and the clouds. It really reinforced this very uneasy feeling. And the painted shadows. Well, the painted shadows, of course, you think of the German expressionist films, Dr. Caligari, that had those very severe painted shadows. But I always wanted to paint shadows. On the film prior to this, Hammett, that Wim Wenders was doing, I believe I talked to Wim about shadows. He, being a German, of course he knew all about. I said, this seems to be a film, well, maybe we can try doing that. And there was some kind of test that had to be shot. I prepared the set. So then I put painted shadows on that little room. Painted shadows coming from the window that would be shown on the floor and maybe on the other wall. So the cameraman arrived to shoot the tests. I had not discussed this with the cameraman, but he was totally furious. He said, I put a light here and it casts a shadow. Your shadow doesn't move. I said, well, every room has a conflicting array of shadows. One from the lamp, one from the natural light coming from, they all crisscross each other. No one gives a damn that this shadow doesn't match the light source of some other place. He wouldn't have it. And I was too, you present an idea, and if they don't like it, then I'm not going to spend my life making a point out of it. So I brought the subject up again with Francis.
Francis and I kind of got that whole aesthetic of doing this extra painting and stuff like that. Also, sometimes, from my end of it, you can't put the shadows where they should be. So if you paint the shadows in, you get that extra texture because you have to light it a certain way, either mechanically because an actor has to look good.
Yeah, to have the shadows on the front of the girl's house, you'd have to have a cherry picker or something.
Yeah,
with a light
huge mechanical thing. I mean, we were on such tight budgets
Yeah.
that we had to think of all of this stuff to save money.
It's fun to do on top
Yeah.
of that. I think what the shadow gives you is just a subliminal level of confusion or just a little something off.
You're Rusty James. Biff Wilcox looking for you, Rusty James.
I'm not hiding.
He says he's gonna kill you, Rusty James.
Saying ain't doing.
What I did in Benny's was that you would have the light coming in from the windows, but I lit the people from the opposite way. So you had these two things that were opposed to each other,
Yeah.
and it looks okay, and you kind of accept it, but there's just something about it. There's something about it that's not right, and you can't put your finger on it. It creates a feeling that you can't really express. Maybe it's like there's something wrong between the relationship of the two brothers. There's something wrong with the relationship of the father with the wife that left. I mean, it's all kind of echoes of that kind of thing, but you don't want it so obvious. I mean, we're talking about it in very obvious terms now, but it's just something that you want to wash over the audience. I think that emotional feeling of the scene is more important than what the dialogue is. The dialogue gives you a little bit of information. If you really look at any movie that's any good, that's got any good acting in it, you can turn off the sound and understand exactly what's happening.
Well, you should be able to.
Yes, yeah.
It's a visual medium. It's not
That's right.
a literature.
Yeah. That, I think, is really, really an important thing philosophically, is that you have to get a feeling of the thing. It's like Francis getting the ballet guy from San Francisco to choreograph the fight.
Yeah.
You have something that's supposed to be real rough and tough, and it becomes, quite beautiful.
Quite
But
beautiful.
also very disturbing, because when the other guy picks up this piece of glass, it's this huge, transparent weapon that slashes Matt's character. I mean, that's unusual. You know, it's not that the other guy has a knife.
I think throughout the film, that and other techniques reinforce this feeling of kind of a disjointed life.
Francis was always so generous
Yeah.
and so good at kind of provoking the best out of everybody.
That's it.
What he always did with me, which I really appreciated, was that he would show me the scene when he'd stage it, and he'd say, well, what do you want to do? And I would say, well, Francis, we should do this and this and this and this. And if he liked it, he'd go, well, what do you want to do first? If he didn't like it, he would say, you know, my brother Augie and I, and he would tell you some allegorical story, and you're listening to it, and you go, well, maybe in that case, we should do that and this and this and that. He'd go, I think that's better. He says, let's do that. And I would say, fine. The first scene in Benny's, I did these really extreme kind of close-ups and split focus things where you had a big person in the foreground, a little person in the background. So what I wanted to do is I just started out going, okay, folks, here we go. Instead of sneaking up on it, I just went for it. I always feel that you know, 185, it's never quite wide enough. It's never quite tall enough. Just because it's my own, that's my own, you know, kind of personal opinion. I have a very tough time doing 185 pictures, you know, because I can't do good, solid composition that would work in that frame. So I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna get a wide angle lens. I'm just gonna shove it in their face. So I went with the big diagonals. And so you get this really big, dramatic, you know, this big, dramatic look.
I ain't never seen you sit still.
And I just played it for that. You know, talking about Benny's pool hall, I love that reticulated effect that you did on that one wall.
With the cracks?
With the cracks. That was brilliant.
I try to take this painter with me all the time, Roger Dietz. He was in Apocalypse in the Philippines and Zabriskie Point. It's like a writer writing a couple of lines in the script. It was writing with a visual way.
All of that stuff is so important because what I always liked about your work when I first met you doing the second unit on Apocalypse was that when you would design something, you would design the wide shot and the closer shots so that there was the kind of the compositional plan would kind of interlock. So when everything was cut together, you always felt like you were in the same place or there was the same kind of compositional strength. And I think that's really, you know, that's really an unusual talent. I mean, it was very easy for me to compose stuff because it was there, you know. It was there in the long shot, it was there in the medium shot, it was in the close-ups. It made my work a lot easier.
We had clocks all over the place.
The best clock is the one, the big giant one that you had
On the truck.
on the truck. And it has no hands. And so what does that mean? Time's run out? You know, time stood still? I mean, it's ambiguous, but there's something very powerful about it because you have the policeman threatening, you know, Mickey Rourke's character.
Yeah.
And eventually, you know, he kills him.
That was an idea that we developed with Francis.
The other clever kind of set decorating thing that you did was actually in that drugstore. We didn't have enough money to get clearance on all the magazines. So you put the plastic tarps over it like they were painting the drugstore and just had a little section of magazines that we could cleared. I mean, great solution. That was a great solution.
Yeah, I remember that plastic.
I loved it that the interiors that you chose had really high ceilings so I could hang all my lights from the ceilings.
Like Benny's.
Benny's was great.
Talking about Benny's, it seems to me we had a fantastic shot of two actors in front of the Benny's window.
Oh yeah.
From the side.
Yeah, the process.
Didn't we rebuild that window? And then had a process screen behind it, and we tented out, and so the actors are in real time, and they speak,
The clouds are
and the clouds are
time-lapse.
going by
Yeah.
500 miles a minute. Which, by the way, you had a guy go to Hawaii.
That's right, because we couldn't get any clouds in Tulsa.
We couldn't get clouds in Tulsa. So you sent cameramen to Hawaii to shoot hours of plates of beautiful cloud movements that we had to pick from.
I would have never been able to think of something like that.
That were done live, I think. Not post-production, like you would today.
Well, I think Francis's philosophy about, if you could do the effect in the camera, you should do it.
If there were still gangs around, I'd be president, not you. You'd be second lieutenant. You might have made it a while on the motorcycle boys rep, but you ain't got your brother's brains. You've got to be smart to run things.
That scene with Mickey floating through the crowd was very interesting.
When we were shooting that close-up, it was going to be very, very tight. Normally, you would lay dolly track, you'd have the dolly, you'd have, him walking along, and when you're that tight, the focus is very critical. I wanted him sharp. So what he did is he just put a seat on the edge of the crane, and and turned the camera on him, and then just swung the arm.
Right.
And we did that, because we had a mechanical problem. We couldn't do it any other way.
Yeah.
It worked out okay. I mean, the interesting thing about the section on the strip was that we have this really long kind of dolly shot that takes them across the whole street and then down the street and over by a big stairway, and Susie Hinton comes down playing a hooker, and then we push in. It was all done off of a crane. Nowadays with Steadicam, that would have been easy to do, but it was very, very complicated. You had to put the long extension on the crane arm, and you had to set the chassis way over to one side. You had to swing the arm out as far as you could go, and then you arranged the cars so the last car we would just miss it, and then we could get the arm over on the sidewalk, and then we tracked the chassis all the way back to the end of the street, and then we had swung the arm out so it was sideways like this, and then we backed up the chassis. Then all we had to do was swing the arm in to get closer to them in the end of the shot. I mean, nowadays that would be very simple, but it took 10 people to do that.
And anyway, you see, he left you alone in the house for those 3 days.
The handheld, I brought in only when things got very stressed out. I started to use it on the strip. You've got Matt and Mickey, as they get drunker and drunker, then everything starts getting unstable, and I went to the handheld. Again, it's the visual feeling of somebody who's kind of drunk and confused and having a wild time. And same thing in the club they go to. But the minute they get outside the club and they were going to the alley, immediately went to a great big wide shot that was very smooth. It's like when you've been in a room that's very noisy and there's a lot of smoke and people have been drinking, and you walk out the door and the cool air hits you, it's like, and so just for a moment, things have changed. Things have changed.
Did you use more than one camera?
No. Couldn't afford to use more than one camera. Also, I'm opposed, except for special things, using two cameras. You don't get the intimacy because you're way back and you're using a longer lens. Maybe you want to have more background and be closer, into the person. You want to use something a little shorter, a little bit closer, instead of going way back and then having a long lens and just having mushball behind everybody. You know, and I think the reason why they do it, you know, in television is because they have all this dialogue that they have to cover, and the writers haven't fine-tuned things, and so they want a way to cut pieces of dialogue out of it. And I just don't think that's good. That's good filmmaking. I think that, you know, you should have, what is your intention? You know, there's a time to be in a two-shot. There's a time for somebody to be in a close-up. There's time.
The choice should support the material.
Right.
And not just for expediency, do it one way or the other.
Man, I love fights, man. This reminds me of the old days when we used to have rumbles. Heroin ruined the gangs, man. Junk, you know?
The color thing was always a big problem. And when Francis came up with the idea of having the fish in color and the boys in black and white, you know, you think of, you know, blue screen, green screen, all these mats and all that kind of stuff. You think about, oh, well, we'll print the whole reel on color film, and then the rest, you know, the black and white would be black and white. But when you print black and white on color stock, it never looks right. It just doesn't work. So I went home, and it was one of those things in the middle of the night, I went, wait a minute. The only thing that are in color are the fish. The water's clear, gray gravel in the bottom, and black around the aquarium. And if we shoot in color, and then we shoot the boys in black and white, we'll just do it with a process screen. So I came in, I presented, you know, my solution to it, and Francis bought it.
What I don't recall, though, is and I don't know the exact purpose of kind of almost like a flash of color in the police car. Mm-hmm. And you see color, I guess, the police light. And why was that?
I think that was because it was him spiritually breaking away from his brother. You know, suddenly everything's been in black and white. Now, you know, there's a moment where, you know, there's color.
It's never really spelt out in the film.
No, it never was. But you know, I've never talked to Francis about it, but that's kind of the reason I gave myself. And when I was transferring it, I got the idea that maybe the last shot with Matt riding the motorcycle, getting to California, getting to freedom with the seagulls and everything, maybe that should be colored a little bit too. So I had the transfer lady put this very subtle kind of warm color, like a sunset, onto it. And when you play the whole sequence together with the color, I thought it worked really well. And I tried to sell that to Francis, and he didn't go for it. But that was my rationale for it.
Not to sound like an old fogey, but if you think of Rumblefish, if it were made today, it wouldn't have this kind of crafted look to it. I'm very glad that we made it in 1983 or whatever, and not in today. It wouldn't be the same film. You do too much because you have the ability to do almost anything. And you make the mistake of doing it rather than using that portion that will help you solve a specific problem and then let the rest go away.
There's one thing that I've always thought about all of us working together, and that is that, you know, we're kind of like a jazz ensemble. You know, the director kind of gives us the melody, what they call in jazz, the line, and we kind of interpret it. You'll do something, and that will make me respond with something, and you'll respond to my response, and the whole thing just gets, you know, gets mixed up together. I always loved all your ideas, and I always, you know, we always got along really well, I thought. You know.
We did, and I always remember it. I repeat it. I always say, I used your name as an example, you know, of being able to to search out ideas with somebody who's sympathetic and comes up too with ideas. And it's not a blank wall, a collaborator.
It is. I guess, like they say in elementary school, we played good together.
Yeah.